Welcome to our YouTube series of interviews. Today we have a topic which maybe not some of you would not find very pleasant to hear, but very necessary to discuss. We will discuss cybersecurity incident management and crisis management, lessons learned from the biggest, most memorable incidents in the past. And we have with us a guest, Senior Information Security Advisor, Rasmus Theede from Theede Consulting. Hello, Rasmus.
Hi.
Rasmus is in the private sector. We met with him when he was a director at the Digital Europe here in Brussels, but he also has experience working in the government sector, as well as also volunteering, supporting digital security for Danish school children. So very different perspective, Rasmus, and this is why we invited you to hear from you from your first-hand experience. What happens when you get hacked?
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me. And I think we say cyber and incident security management is more important and more focused now than it has been ever before with everything is going on in Europe. Short background for me in regard to incident management. I have been in cyber security and incident management for, I think 25 years. Starting in the Danish Navy, and then being a global auditor, traveling around the world, auditing different offices in AP Moller-Maersk shipping company. And then for the last 15 years or so, I've been a Chief Information Security Officer for very large global corporations. So I've been involved in handling information security myself on a technical level. And I've been involved in managing and having the responsibility for literally thousands of incidents in my career. Most incidents are not very big and severe. They are handled day to day, so that's why there are so many. But you only hear about the very big one in the press, but there's a lot going under the radar. So in terms of information security incident, my first introduction to that was actually when I was hired by AP Moller-Maersk as a student assistant in around the year 2000, I think. And that was actually the first global incident. It was called Code Red 2, which was a computer worm actually jumping from computer to computer, infected millions of computers around the world. I didn't have a lot of IT experience, but I had a lot of incident management experience from the military, a different kind of incident management. So I think I managed that in a way that I was hired to be the AP Moller's incident management director. And what happened at that time is actually a bit similar to what actually happened today. Some people may disagree, but in my opinion, incident management and how we go about it and the mistakes we make is actually not very different today than they were 30 years ago or 20 years ago. So what happened is you get an alert, everybody is getting up, and a lot of panic, at least in the start. Code Red 2 was the first major incident in the world, actually. We had something before called love letter for use, something we call that, but this is automatically. And what happened is that today we are focusing more about ransomware, as a lot of you may know. For those of you that don't know, it's an attack where you encrypt all the target's data, and you want money to actually give them the key to decrypt the data. And which can be very, very damaging because it can also be customer data and other data that you really don't want out in the open. So in terms of managing incidents, it is actually about the management. You need to take it. You need to take it in a structured way. There's a lot of good. Sorry, I just lost the thread here. Would you cut that out?
Sure. And but I have a question. So you said you were there
Yeah.
for the love letter attack. What happened? You received an alert. There's a virus. Someone spotted it. What was the first actions? You said this brought you a raise, promotion, which means you probably had the good knowledge, what you said, but also the good instinct. So what were your first instincts and what happened in the organization so that you handled the incident well?
In the first, in the first major incidents, one of our issues was that we were not very prepared. The processes were not very clear. The tool we had to deal with incidents were non-existent. We actually had to make some ourselves. Nobody was trained for this. It's never happened before. So that also meant that it was chaotic for pretty much all the companies I heard about. We didn't know what to do. There was no experts we could go to because the expert hadn't discovered it as well. Yeah. But we're more well off today. So when we first hear about the incident, I think we should talk about actually how incidents are discovered, because it's very difficult to discover a lot of these incidents. It's not like the movies when people sitting in a cyber operation room and big red alert is popping up and everybody is handling that. That's just not the way it happens. It usually discovered by a user. It is discovered by sudden operational issues, or something is breaking down and you don't know what. So that's 1,000 ways you can actually discover these security incident. And it's also important to know that security incident is not just about cyber attacks. It's a lot of internal incidents, external incidents. If you go about vendors, vendors breaking down, or big cloud servicing going down that you are dependent on. Internally, you have fraud, you have people who don't like each other, you have data being stolen, you have operational errors, etc., etc. So if we're talking about information security incident, that has so many different categories, and you need to be able to manage them all. So yeah.
You mentioned also the errors from inside the organization. It's not always an external attacker. It could also happen from inside, but those are more difficult to manage, I guess, because it's people with knowledge about the organization. What kind of detection? So you say we have to focus on detection, maybe develop the procedures so that they're very crystal clear and they always lead the information to the right person to handle the incident in a quick way, because timing is also a factor when you're dealing with incidents. But how, what kind of tools or like practices you could recommend for monitoring or for detecting insider threats, like
yeah, I mean there's two kind of insider threats. There's malicious insider threats, and then there's the insider threats that are just bad management or mistake or errors. So what we need to know, especially in larger corporation, is that all of the people are reflecting society. We as society, we have maybe criminals, we have people that want to follow procedure and don't want to follow procedure, and people that don't like each other, and there's so many different aspects, especially in larger corporation, that you need to it's not something you can just put on cyber probe in and detect. You really need to be out in the business in order to do that. I have handled everything from some for internal fraud, of course, internal threats, where we need to figure out which computer the threats are coming from. Several cases of child pornography, unfortunately, in a global organization. But I will say the most typical reasons for incidents is just errors, even human errors, and either because they don't know the procedures, they don't want to follow the procedures, they get the wrong procedures, etc., etc., etc. So human errors are, I will say, is 80% of incident handling, and then the last 20% is malicious behavior, either inside or outside.
But then it sounds easy. Sorry to interrupt, but it sounds
yeah.
easy. Human error, so train your people better, and also incident response. It's more obvious. If it's just someone's error, then you correct the error and you're back on track. But what are the challenges there, especially when we speak about insider threat action post-incident, as well as acting in the right way for cyber attack?
I would say, actually, when you mention that way, that I see one of the biggest issues is that compliance and real cyber security is getting further and further apart. Because if you're taking these two, if you're taking ISO 20001 and GDPR and everything, as you say, it seems quite easy. Why don't you just make a procedure? Why don't you just make a business continuity plan, etc., etc.? There are hundreds of reasons why that failed. And we're making complex risk management process, and we'll ask the board of directors to take complex decisions that they have no knowledge about and that we are not able to explain them. So one thing is to have all of these procedures, and what is also important is when we are audited in these procedures, you know, they can only audit if the procedure is present, not if it's actually working, or if someone just decide not to take the procedures, etc., etc. Again, we are humans. We do what we want. Sometimes it's not very appropriate. So for instance, we just have a large incident here in Denmark, where actually all trains and buses were actually out of service for a complete day. You can imagine the chaos that actually brought. And that actually, it originated from a cyber attack, but a very, very small cyber attack. But what actually happened is that due to lack of business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, due to untested processes in that way, we actually ended up shooting our own feet, because software patch was actually rolled out that actually destroyed a lot of the IT systems that have to be rebooted. So it was actually not the incident; it was actually the response to the incident that actually created that whole complete Danish disaster. Yeah, and that's actually happening a lot. You have a lot of pressure as a CISO. Actually, you know, you have the board of directors that want you to respond. So yesterday, you have the customers, you have the press. If you're a larger company, you and then somebody, you know, usually you just respond in a hasty way, and usually that is actually what is making the damage from the incident.
Yes, I see this pressure. Basically, it's driving maybe to overdo and sometimes not take consideration of the risks for the information, for the organization, but more about concern about the risk of publicity or like the virus spreading. I can give you an example, something that always makes me feel more comfortable in air flying, airplanes. So basically, statistics show it's the safest mode of traveling, and incidents happen only when the human actually overrides the system. So this shows you how important the protocol and the system are to be able to then handle the incident correctly. But can you think of a standard or a practice that we could all adopt as security professionals or companies that could be this golden standard and system for handling incidents?
It's funny you should mention airplanes. Actually, very inspired about that also in incident handling. I don't know why I really like these TV series called Air Crash Investigation, where you actually see why airplanes actually go down. And what have inspired me there as a CISO is actually that they have these very short, precise procedure if something goes wrong. You know, you don't have the time to read 20 thick books. You just need one page maybe. If we have ransomware, this is what we do. And I have rarely seen that in real life. So that is definitely a recommendation. You know, communication is very, very important. Who is actually communicating? Who is talking to the customers? Who's talking to the interns? Who's talking to the vendors? There's rarely a plan on doing that. So it's actually the same. It seems very logical, but a lot of these mistakes are actually done today as we done 20 years ago. Lack of really baseline security, basic security. That's a different standard from that. Instead of using, you know, you only have the resources you have and the money you have and the staff you have. So you can use, you know, a year to implement, for instance, ISO 20001, or you can go out and say, okay, before I do that, let's install the basic cybersecurity controls, like things we know, you know, patch management, change management, having antivirus and stuff like that. Because by far the most incidents will be stopped by having the basic controls in place.
Mm-hmm.
There are different standards for that, but I know there's a UK standard, and we have one in Denmark also made by our own government. But when I visit companies, even big companies today, they just have that in place. And it's not because they are lazy; it's just because nobody have told them what to do and why in a way they can actually understand. For me, I think we have and have always have a big communication issues in the cybersecurity experts. We are not very good at communicating today. There's a lot that have. We're actually in a field that you can say whatever you want and be an expert, because nobody knows. I've seen now in TV doing this Ukraine crisis that there are a lot of experts that has clearly never been out in real life, and they can take, you know, whatever they want, say whatever they want, and the news will actually grab that because it sounds exciting. But that also means that usually the majority of the corporation just give up and say we cannot handle this anyway. But it is very simple to catch the majority of these incidents. It's first of all have the command line in place. You know, who is actually deciding? Should a CISO really decide if you have to take down a corporate network, for instance, or do you want to involve board of directors in that decision before you actually do it? So these hasty decisions, having your basic procedures, doesn't have to be long procedures, but who's doing what, who's communicating. Training. I've never met, as I recall, one of the customers I have now, anybody that has actually trained their procedures. You know, that just looking down on papers and say, okay, we have this scenario with this computer virus or whatever, what do we actually do, who to communicate and stuff like that. It's just never happening, and it's very, very cheap to do.
Yes, it's completely to avoid defining something theoretical that you haven't went through, because there's so many lessons learned and struggles and questions you would ask yourself when you are on the field and dealing with the issue. But here, what I captured from you, security personnel needs to communicate better, or maybe, because again, we are often considered to have to be superhumans to be in cybersecurity, to do it all and know everything in the world. Maybe also just involves communication specialists when it comes to deciding the flows of communication, deciding the language of communication. But then also security experts, this is what they have to have the skill of writing in a clear way, procedure that they can imagine the realistic situation in their hand to be workable and useful. And then last but not least, what you say is just go through it, check it. If it's still working, people have to be aware and to feel the feeling. I know of some companies doing it. Those are obviously the most mature organizations. I know ENISA is helping others through cyber exercises that are targeted at specific critical sectors. We had in last year, 2022, cyber exercise for the hospital sector, where they did this crisis scenario, and they went through all the steps from the news media reporting to cooperating with other hospitals and seeing, okay, where do we go first and next. So there is a little move in this direction, but it feels that we don't evolve much. We do evolve a lot our technology, so there's more and more technology for security and probably complicating our life more than solving the core issues. But why don't we learn how? You work for the military sector. How is the military sector also very traditional and regulated sector? How are they learning? How are they improving their processes with the time?
When I was in the Navy, there was a sign on the door saying, "You fight the way you practice," and we spend most of our time practicing, of course. But again, it was about training. Everybody knows what to do when. It was about clear communication lines. You know, when you are in a sharp situation, you don't argue fight about who to do and what to do. You know, it was about internal trust. So I didn't really experience in the Navy. I think we were also out in some very sharp situations. You know, rescuing people and stuff like that. And everybody just knew what to do. It was the culture, I think, and in creating that culture is an art, but it can be done. Nobody was questioning again the decision. We have the right equipment and etc. etc. So I think that was really something I learned a lot about. And I think in terms of information security, again, cybersecurity, we are in a position that we know a lot of stuff that other people wouldn't know. But we can also pretty much decide ourselves what we know, meaning that, you know, we can interpret everything the way we want. A lot of security experts don't agree to what it's all about, and sometimes when you're a cyber expert, all you see is cyber attacks. You know, you don't have an overview of the business. You have never talked to the IT operations. You have never talked to employees that actually need to live with you at this decision. All you see is actually malware, and then you decide to yell at the business when they don't comply. So internal communication, but also external communication. You know, I had an incident one time where a big vendor of ours actually brought some systems down by mistake, meaning we have a lot of ships that were in Maersk that just couldn't deliver the cargo. That was a major incident, and I went to the vendor. We got together with the vendor. I have 4 or 5 of my tech guys to actually assist them in getting this up and running, and they showed up with 3 lawyers. So having a relationship to your vendor also, you know, who to contact, you know, take a cup of coffee once in a while. So you actually, when the flag goes up, you actually know what to do. That is what is most important.
This is what I was thinking when you were speaking about the lawyers. I personally am in the governance, risk and compliance field, so I'm this one dealing with the regulations, dealing with the standards, with the implementation of the policies. But sometimes I have the feeling that we are too much seeing only this part of information security. So in this part, eventually we engage our staff in applying and proving that they apply some standards that obviously it's a best practice, but eventually they are not trained to go beyond that. They're not trained to actually respond. And so I have heard also from the financial sector, very regulated one, from National Bank in Europe saying, look, we want, with the new Digital Operation Resilience Act, cybersecurity legislation for financial sector, we want entities to report to us incident in the 15 minutes. 15 minutes. So people were saying, well, do we handle the incident, or do we start discussing with legal, okay, what we can report and how? And this kind of reporting and visibility takes now more priority because it's regulated, and it is also a result of the fact that the incidents are very mediated. So do we not just make our life too complicated with making big noise for things we're still learning, obviously, how to do, and then spending more efforts of reacting to the noise rather than focus on improve? How can we break this cycle?
Yeah, focus on improve is of course important, but it's also need to know that we actually know what to do usually. So we have been doing this for 20 years. We can learn from each other. We can discuss it, etc. We're not very good at that because a lot of people still see some embarrassing to have an incident, even though we all have them once in a while. But again, also legislation is very don't really take into account what is actually can happen out there. It doesn't take into account that suddenly 1,000 people cannot work, and in an incident you have to take decisions if you want to cut these 1,000 people out to avoid the worm spreading, or what you want to do. There's so many practical things that is so far away from NIS2 and GDPR, etc. As an example, I actually had a customer where they have a GDPR incidents where a customer actually wanted to get all his data, and they use so much time. I mean, hundreds of hours actually to do, because they have never tried it before. So they have to delay these actual cyber incident effort for a week or two, right? So that is again where legislation is actually maybe hindering cybersecurity. I don't think we come in a way where we can write legislation in the way that how people actually doing this in the daily, but we can write a legislation and come to an understanding at least that there's a difference between these two worlds. I had a lot of ISO auditors auditing me. I've also been an auditor where I actually complained afterwards that they actually didn't find the weak spots that I knew were there, basically these spots. Because if I have to go to the board of director and saying, I need money for this and this, and they just give a clean report and a certification, and then you also have an issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed. So this, I think, links to what you said earlier, that we eventually, from time to time, it's normal to have incidents, and probably it's healthy also to have incidents to keep your muscles up and running if you don't have the testing procedures. But why is it that we don't share this? Channel is devoted on this specific element. Let's share, let's learn from each other, and feel more comfortable speaking about cybersecurity. But why are there not more communities? We have a lot of conferences where we share a lot of technical data. We have started with a few ISAC, information security analysis, and sharing groups here in Europe, but it's still very limited in terms of scope compared to the fact that everyone is now impacted by cybersecurity. Do you see a plan or a vision of how we can improve this sharing and cooperation?
It's a bit, one reason is of course confidentiality. If this is involving customers or employees and stuff like that, we cannot really share it. But as I said earlier also on, there's also kind of we really want to look good. We have control over everything. We won't really maybe find it a bit embarrassing telling about incident. I've been in dozens of these groups in my career with the scope of actually sharing some of this, and this has never happened.
Indeed.
And I don't think, actually, I must say today, I think we must just accept that that's the way it is. You know, the press is not doing it any better, right? You know, every time it's more like, at least in Danish TV, and I think it's the same worldwide, you know, it's more exciting that a company is hit by a cybersecurity incident than a huge financial crisis. So nobody wants to be out in the press and having all of these questions, and then the security expert coming afterwards and with all that good advice. And but by the end of the day, I also think that, you know, maybe that's a bit controversial, but we don't really need knowledge sharing a lot on that level, because we know what to do. You know, we know how to handle ransomware. We don't need to learn that. There's a lot of advice and procedure on that. And I wish there was, you know, a community. Of course, you know, when I have shared that knowledge, it has been, you know, in our own little unofficial community, see, with the 3 or 4 CISOs that we get together. But don't think you will get this out officially where the press can see it or anything like that.
No, I think this is not the objective for the press to see it, but I think we also have to change the culture. So I have audited companies, and when obviously one of the questions, did you have any cyber incident in the last 3 years? When I hear the answer no, to me, actually, it's more of a red flag, because then, you know, you have to start from scratch to check how prepared they are to handle this incident. They haven't had probably the prompt, as you said, the clean certificate doesn't give, let's say, budget for improving your response reaction. And on the other hand, probably in most cases, this is just a fact of not being able to even discover it. As you said, discoverability is a big issue. So we have to, and probably us as security professionals, we have to start from there. We have to go out and change the culture, because it's okay to be hacked. You are a subject of criminal activity. You shouldn't be victimized. You shouldn't be afraid of this. Of course, the only question is, how do you react when this happened, and what did you do before to prevent it? So those are the questions we should ask ourselves. But hacking per se shouldn't be news anymore. Supply chain security becomes even more complex than to discover incidents. Do you have experience with this? How did this experience differ from the love letter? You know, you have malware and you know it.
Yeah, I mean, just about the culture, I do agree, but I will also, you know, I also need to look at it has not really happened over the last 20 years. So personally, that is not where I would put the focus. I would put the focus on, as you said, actually getting the basic procedure right, getting the basic technology, just having a business continuity plan is actually tested. So if you do all of that, you are very, very well off in terms of being hit of modern threats like ransomware, etc., etc. And then I would maybe work on the culture change after that. But culture change, as you know, is very, very, very difficult, especially between countries and stuff like that. So I guess maybe right now I give a little up about that, and is focusing more on the practical things to avoid company getting hacked or whatever. Yeah, in terms of supply chains, it's a huge issue, especially when outsourcing, of course. You know, I spent almost a decade building up a huge security global infrastructure, and then we say, okay, you know, we cannot just keep training our own people. You know, this is not our core business. You know, operating all of this huge, it was literally hundreds of, you know, firewalls and all other stuff, and we decided to outsource it. Because then we could outsource it to experts, you know, but we didn't have fewer incidents in regarding that. It was actually more difficult to discover and handle the incidents, because we didn't have access to the data anymore. We didn't have access to the background. We have to totally rely on the vendor. There was also, of course, a lot of good things about that. We didn't have to hire our own people. We didn't have to train our own people, etc., etc. But in the supply chain, there is an issue. Also, because sometimes you don't realize that you have a vendor or a supply chain that's actually critical for you. So you don't really have a proper contract or whatever, and that small supply is actually going out, and it actually affects a large size of your business. Another thing that is seen as an incident, it's an issue, is now we're talking about compliance, for instance. It's very, very hard to ensure compliance with your vendors. Again, of course, and I can see that both on the vendor and the customer side of a number of places. And on the vendor side, you have a lot of customers wanting different types of security that is impossible for you to handle. And at the same time, the pressure for money in the contract, etc., that is very, very difficult. From the customer side, again, how do you know that a big vendor is actually compliant? Well, you can look that they have a ISO standard or whatever, but as we also discussed, it doesn't really tell you anything that they have a bunch of paper in place. It doesn't tell about if it's actually working, how many internal incidents they have, etc., etc. So you lose control in order to gain a more focus yourself, but that can also be dangerous. But with that being said, I think that the amount of incidents actually occurring after we outsource was actually fewer than when we did it ourselves. And that was, of course, also because we moved away a lot of our IT infrastructure, and then we didn't have the incident anymore. So.
I see. So again, here question is it visibility or it's less risky? But as a result, you had to be less of a fireman and more focus on your business, which I think many companies should strive to. This brings me to something that at the EU might be helpful. First, for the supply chain, you have NIS2 now applying to supply chain, so it's not you, it's the regulator that basically can check compliance. But you also have it's still very early stage, but we have the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, which would actually encourage, or let's say oblige, any producer of products with digital elements, so huge scope, to have secure development practices, to have vulnerability management, to have proper security processes in their place. So this, in a way, the regulator understood the challenge, and they're taking a little bit the lead, so to facilitate bit company to company compliance assurance, because then it's a huge multiplier. It's a huge challenge to handle. But okay, something I wanted also to share is the EU is also aware of wide cyber crisis possibilities. Obviously, if it's a cyber crisis, it could be for one company only, but if this company is critical or like large company that supplies in different European countries, then you actually have European crisis.